She heard it before she saw anything. One note, low and steady, riding the cold morning air like something alive. Coming from a building that had been locked since 1994. Wren Calloway stopped walking. She stood on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, with a worn leather satchel on her shoulder and exactly $1 in her pocket. 21 years old, no home, no plan, no one expecting her anywhere. She should have kept walking. Instead, she listened. The note held, steady and warm and round, swelling when the wind came down off the ridge, settling when it let go. Not a moan, not a draft. A pitch, a true held musical pitch coming out of a building that had been dark and locked for 28 years. Her grandmother had taught her the difference, and standing there on Wicket Road in the October cold, Wren understood two things at once. First, that she knew exactly what was making that sound. Second, that whatever was inside that building had been waiting, not for just anyone, for someone who would stop, for someone who would listen, for someone who could still hear a pipe speak. She reached up and closed her hand around the old tuning fork hanging on a cord against her chest, the one her grandmother left her. The only thing she had kept. Then she walked toward the sound. She had no idea that inside that building, a dead man had left her everything she needed to begin. She heard it before she saw anything. One note, low and steady, riding the cold morning air like something alive. Wren Calloway stopped walking. She stood on Wicket Road with a worn leather satchel on her shoulder and exactly $1 in her pocket. October, Pennsylvania. The kind of cold that finds the back of your neck first. The trees along the ridge had gone rust and gold, and the morning light was thin and gray, and the road ahead was dirt and quiet, and she had nowhere left to be. She listened. The note held, swelling when the wind came down off the ridge, settling when it let go. Not a moan, not a draft finding a gap in old boards. A pitch, a true held musical pitch, low and warm and round, coming from a building that had been dark since 1994. Her grandmother had taught her the difference. She stood very still, the kind of still you learn when someone teaches you to listen before you touch anything. Her grandmother Odell had been teaching her that since she was 9 years old. You stand still first. You hear what the room is already saying. Then you decide whether you belong in it. The building ahead was a board and batten workshop set back from the road. The siding had gone the gray of weathered barns. The chimney was cold. A carved sign above the door had worn down to a ghost of letters. The windows were tall and arched and dark. And from somewhere deep inside, it steady as a held breath, came the note. One note, still breathing. After 28 years. Wren reached up and closed her hand around the tuning fork hanging on a cord against her chest. Her grandmother's. She had kept it because she could not explain why, except that it felt wrong to leave it. The way it feels wrong to leave a lamp burning in an empty room. You turn back. You don't know why. You just do. She walked toward the building. She had $1. She had a satchel with 2 changes of clothes and a small framed photograph and a wooden pipe no bigger than a forearm wrapped in a sock at the bottom. She had 19 months of sleeping in a rented room in Allentown and waking before dawn to stock shelves at a hardware store and spending her afternoons tuning battered upright pianos for a rental company that sent them to school auditoriums. That was what she was, a girl who tuned cheap pianos for schools. That was the whole of it, except for the note that should not be there, the note coming out of a building that had been locked since before she was in middle school. She stopped in front of the door, laid her palm flat against the old boards, felt nothing, no vibration, no mechanical source. Just the low, even breath of it riding in on the wind and fading when the wind let go, humming and going, like something's leaving. She pressed her ear against the wood. It was real. She stepped back and looked at the sign above the door. She could just make out 3 words worn into the grain. Workshop, road, builder, an organ builder's workshop. And inside it, breathing all alone in the dark, one pipe still speaking. Her grandmother would have said something quiet and certain here, something that sounded like common sense and meant something much larger. Odell Calloway had a gift for that, for saying the exact thing that lodged in you like a splinter and worked its way in deeper over the years. Wren stood on the road, and the note came again on the wind, and she thought about her grandmother and the $1 in her pocket, and the fact that she had nowhere to be. Then she turned and walked the 2 miles back to town. Because she needed a key. And you cannot walk into something that was left for you without doing it right. The Stoverton Township office sat in what used to be a feed store on the main road. Wide plank floors, a pressed tin ceiling gone dark with age, and behind the counter a man in his early 60s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a cup of coffee going cold at his elbow. Clellan Burse, Township Clerk, Historical Society President, the kind of man who knows where every old thing in a small county is buried and exactly whose name is on the deed. Wren set her satchel down, asked if the township had any property listed for surplus under $10. Clellan put his pen down, looked at her for a long moment. The way you look at someone when they have just said a thing you have been waiting a long time to hear, and you want to make sure you heard it right. Then he said, "There was one." He told her about the Amos Vetch place, out on Wicket Road, organ builder's workshop. Surplus since the mid-90s. Never sold. Nobody in Stoverton built organs anymore.
and nobody from away wanted a building that size with a half-finished instrument in it and a lower road that flooded every spring. $1? Wren kept her face still. Cleland took his glasses off, set them on the counter, and then he asked the question she would remember for the rest of her life. You wouldn't be any relation to Odell Calloway, would you? Not a question, not quite. Wren said Odell had been her grandmother. Cleland was quiet a while. The kind of quiet that has weight to it. The kind a person earns. Then he reached into the bottom drawer of the desk and brought out a heavy old iron key on a braided cord. Dark with handling. The kind of dark that takes decades of palms to make. He set it on the counter between them. Amos Vetch gave me this key the winter before he passed, he said. Told me to hold it for whoever could still hear a pipe speak. I asked him what on earth that meant, and he smiled and said I'd know them when they walked in. He looked at the key, then at Wren. Better than 28 years that key has been in that drawer. He paused. Your grandmother came out to Amos's shop once, long time back. Brought him a cracked reed she couldn't quiet. The two of them stood at his bench from after dinner until dark. Hardly a word between them, just listening. He picked up his coffee, set it back down without drinking. He told me after that she was the only other soul in this valley who heard an organ instead of just hearing it loud. He pushed the key across the counter. I'd say this has been waiting on you. Wren paid her $1. Cleland wrote the receipt out by hand, stamped it. That was the whole of it. A building for the price of a cup of coffee, a deed, and an iron key on a braided cord. She walked back out Wicket Road with the key warm in her fist, and she stood at the door again and fit the iron key to the lock, and it resisted, then turned. With a gritty groan, she felt all the way up her arm. The way a stiff old mechanism moves when the oil has gone to varnish. When something has been still for a very long time and does not know yet that it is allowed to open. Inside, the air was still and cool and thick. Old glue, beeswax, wood dust gone to powder. Late morning light came gray through the tall, arched windows and lay in pale rectangles across the plank floor. And against the far wall, rising nearly to the rafters, stood the organ. She stopped breathing for a moment. It was enormous. Its oak case was raw and unstained. Its keyboards were fitted. Its great leather bellows had collapsed and sagged like a sleeping animal. And ranged across its front in rows on rows were the pipes. Slim, spotted metal pipes in their racks like a stand of silver reeds. Square wooden pipes stepping up in size. Little stopped pipes no bigger than a finger. All of them dust gray and mute. Hundreds of voices. Not one of them had ever spoken. Wren moved toward it slowly. A cold went through her that had nothing to do with the unheated room. The whole instrument was finished enough to play. Every pipe seated in its hole on the wind chest. Every rank had a small slip of paper tucked beside it in a careful slanting hand. A stop name, a pitch, A note. Open diapason 8-foot scaled. Stopped wood 8-foot mouths to set. Voix celeste to be tuned last when the room is warm. 41 ranks. 41 slips of paper. Not one of them had ever been voiced. She understood then what she was looking at. An organ built complete and never given a voice. A choir assembled and never told to sing. The old man had made every pipe, racked every one, fitted everything into its place with the patience of someone who intended to come back. And he had not come back, except from the left end of the organ, set a little apart against the cold fieldstone, came the note. She crossed to it. Standing free of the case, lashed to an iron bracket, was a single enormous wooden pipe. Pedal pipe, square in section, taller than 2 men. Its dark oak boards joined fine and tight. Its great mouth cut low near the floor. Its foot capped with a square of oiled leather. And from somewhere in its tall throat, the breath of a note, low and warm and steady, swelling when wind pressed at the loose boards, sighing when it let go. Not a draft moaning, a pitch, a true-held musical pitch, the deep foundation note an organ builder lays under everything else. Coming clean and round out of a pipe in a building where every other voice had been silent for 28 years. Wren laid her palm flat against the tall oak side of the pipe, felt the faint, even shiver of moving air working inside the wood. The note hummed up through her hand, low and warm, in tune with itself. No hiss at the front of it, no waver at the end, voiced true, exactly the way her grandmother had taught her a pipe should be. She stood there a long time. She did not understand yet how it could speak with no bellows pumping, no keys pressed, no hand at the wind chest. She only knew that of every voice in that silent room, this one alone had refused to fall quiet, and that it had been set apart against the stone wall on purpose, where it could not be missed by anyone who walked all the way to the end of the road and stopped to listen. She slept that first night on the bare plank floor with her coat for a blanket. The note kept her company in the dark. Morning came gray and clean. Wren woke to the low note and the smell of old wood and the sound of a truck slowing on Wicket Road. She went to the tall window. An old pickup had pulled onto the gravel apron. A man in his early 70s climbed down slow, a covered dish in his hands, looking at the building the way you look at a house where someone you loved used to live. He took his cap off when she opened the door. "Harwick Gann," he said. "I farm the bottom land down past the bridge. Used to keep this stubborn man company of an evening." He nodded past her at the dark room. Saw a light moving in there last night. Figured it was kids again. My wife sent me up with the dish on account of you can't argue with the person who's brought you food." Then the wind came down the ridge. The great pipe breathed its low note, and his face changed. Something opened in it, something old and surprised and grateful. "Still talking," he said quietly. "Lord have mercy, after all these years." They sat on a sawhorse and an overturned crate in the doorway and ate his wife's food, which was warm and rich, and the best thing Wren had tasted in a month. Harwick had known Amos Vetch going on 50 years. The old organ builder had come up to Stoverton in the early 60s, bought the workshop on Wicket Road because the rent was nothing and the quiet was good for hearing fine work. For 30-odd years, he was the man 5 counties brought their wheezing church organs to. He never married. He worked late by lamplight and the tall pipe against the wall. Harwick set down his fork. "Amos called it his ground," he said. "Said an organ builder who can't lay one true low note under everything has no business building anything on top of it." Wren asked how a pipe could be sounding with no wind put to it. Harwick nodded slowly, like a man who had been waiting a long time for someone to ask that exact question. "He built the shop to breathe through one pipe," he said. "Cut a wind passage from a vent in the foundation up through the floor and into the foot of that pipe. So when the valley wind comes down the ridge and presses on the stone, it draws a steady little draft up the inside, just enough to make the mouth speak." He paused. "I helped him chisel the channel through the sill. Spring of '68. Never understood why a man would go to all that trouble for one low note nobody asked for." He looked at the pipe. "He said a workshop with one voice still living in it is a workshop that's only resting, not dead." Wren sat with that a while. A workshop with one voice still living is a workshop that's only resting. She looked at the 41 silent ranks behind her. All those pipes standing in the dark waiting, and the one voice that had refused to go quiet breathing in the cold air, keeping the door open. That was the 4th morning. On the 5th, something else happened. She was measuring the wind chest, learning the spacing of the ranks when she heard boots on the gravel outside. Not Harwick's heavy tread. Something lighter, more deliberate. The kind of walk that has made up its mind about something before it arrives. The woman in the doorway was 38, dark hair pulled back, a canvas bag over one shoulder. She had her father's eyes, Wren would realize later. Cleland's careful, assessing look. Except where Cleland's eyes were patient, this woman's were something else. Watchful, and not entirely at ease. "Lyndon Burse," she said. "My father runs the township office. He mentioned someone had finally taken the Vetch place." She held up the canvas bag. "He sent lunch." Wren thanked her. Lyndon stepped inside without being invited, which was fine. It was a public county road and a recently purchased building, and Wren was a stranger, and people in small towns check on things. That was reasonable. Except Lyndon was not checking on the building. She was looking at the organ. The way you look at something you have thought about for a long time, something you have a complicated history with.
She walked the length of the silent ranks slowly, her fingers hovering near the pipe racks without quite touching. Reading the stop slips in Amos's slanting hand, her mouth went tight at the Voix Celeste slip, and then tighter at the open diapason. She knew what she was reading. She turned back to Wren. "You know what this is," Lyndon said. It was not a question. "A pipe organ," Wren said, unvoiced, all 41 ranks.
"An instrument worth more than the building it's sitting in, built by a man who spent 46 years doing this work." Lyndon paused. "Do you know the trade?" Wren said her grandmother had taught her to voice and tune reed organs, that she had been tuning keyboard instruments since she was 9. Lyndon looked at her for a long moment. "Reed organs," she said, "and pipe work, small scale. My grandmother apprenticed under a pipe organ builder in the Pennsylvania Dutch tradition." "Your grandmother is not here."
Wren did not answer that, because there was nothing to answer. It was true. Odell was not here. Odell had been gone 2 years, and Wren had spent those 2 years tuning rented uprights in school auditoriums and sleeping in a boarding house in Allentown and trying to figure out what she was without the one person who had always known. Lyndon set the canvas bag down on the workbench, looked at the organ again. Then she said it, lightly, precisely, the way you say a thing you have been carrying for a long time and have finally found the right moment to set down where it will do the most damage. "I hope you know what you're doing. The tools in this shop weren't built for someone still learning." She left without waiting for an answer. Wren stood in the empty room. The note held on. She picked up Lyndon's canvas bag, looked inside. A sandwich wrapped in wax paper, an apple, a small jar of cold coffee. She sat down on the floor and ate it. Because whatever that conversation was, it did not change the fact that she was hungry. And it did not change the fact that the organ was here. And it did not change the fact that somewhere in this building, sealed in the dark, a dead man had been waiting 28 years for someone who could still hear the pipe speak. And she had heard it. She had heard it on the road before she even knew what it was. So Lyndon Burse could say what she liked. Wren had work to do. She spent that day and the next learning the room with her hands. She walked the ranks of the great silent organ and read them the way Odell had taught her to read a voice. By the cut of the mouths, the set of the languids, the careful graduated scaling that stepped each pipe up in size by an exact proportion. She read the stop slips. She ran her fingertip along the edge of each mouth, feeling the precision of the cut. The old man had been meticulous. Every pipe made with the patience of someone who believed the work itself was the point, whether or not anyone was watching. She found Odell in the work, not in a way she could explain, not in any single thing, but in the feeling of the voicing knives laid in their row on the bench.
in the little wind tester with its rubber bulb worn smooth at the grip, in the languid setting tool beside it. Each one called up a pair of hands, a voice, a smell of beeswax and felt, and warm bellows leather. You never force a voice, Wren. She could hear it as clearly as if Odell were standing behind her left shoulder. Cut the wind down. Let the lip find its speech. Listen for the note to come up clean. No hiss at the front of it. No waver at the end. A sound that opens like a held breath. By the third day, she had taken one small, stopped wooden pipe from its rack, seated it on the wind tester, and voiced it. Cut the wind down a hair. Eased the mouth open by a fraction. Listened. The note came up clean, warm, round, without a hiss. The first pipe to be voiced in that shop in 28 years. Wren laughed out loud in the empty room. A sudden, unguarded laugh she had not heard from herself in a long time. It bounced off the plank walls and the cold field stone and came back to her strange and bright. The trade was still in her hands. It had only been waiting, the way the organ had been waiting, for someone who could hear it. On the 6th evening, Harwick came back with a jar of apple butter and a loaf his wife had baked. He found Wren cross-legged on the floor with a pipe in her lap and a voicing knife in her hand, and he sat on the sawhorse and watched her work for a while without speaking. That was something she liked about Harwick Gann. He understood that quiet is not emptiness. He told her more about Amos that evening. How the man had come from a family of craftsmen 3 generations back. How he had apprenticed under 2 different organ builders before striking out on his own at 30. How he worked without a radio and without a telephone for most of his career because he said the noise got inside the work. How the churches came to him, not the other way around. Small congregations, county parishes, places with no money and old instruments and nobody left who knew how to fix them. He drove a 30-year-old truck until the engine gave out, and he kept driving it on prayer and stubbornness, Harwick said. And when a church couldn't pay him, he didn't say a word about it, just wrote something in that book of his and packed his tools and came home. What book? Wren said. His voicing book. Kept a record of every instrument he ever worked on, every job, every fix, every pipe he made, carried it everywhere. Harwick looked at the organ. He used to say the work only counts if somebody writes it down. Otherwise, it's just air. Wren looked at the organ. 41 ranks of pipes. Not one of them voiced, and a book she had not found yet. She looked back at the ground pipe, standing apart against the cold stone, breathing its low, even note. Heavier at the foot than it had any right to be. She had noticed that when she first examined it, had told herself it was just the density of the old oak. Old wood is dense. Old wood surprises you. But she had been thinking about it ever since. That night, She lay on the floor with her coat for a blanket and the note breathing in the dark above her, and she thought about the key. How it had been in Cleland Burse's drawer for 28 years, waiting for the right person. How Amos had known something about that, had trusted something about it. A workshop with one voice still living is a workshop that's only resting, not dead. A held door. That was what it was. The note was a held door, an old man's way of saying from beyond the silence, the shop is still open. Come in. In a language only another organ builder could hear. She thought about Odell, about the evening Amos had spent at the bench with her grandmother. Two people standing in the lamplight listening to a pipe speak and stop and speak, hardly a word between them. He told me after that she was the only other soul in this valley who heard an organ instead of just hearing it loud. Wren pressed her fingers against the tuning fork on its cord. She thought about Lyndon Burse, the careful precision of that one sentence. The tools in this shop weren't built for someone still learning. The way Lyndon had looked at the organ, not with wonder, with something older and more complicated, with want, with loss. Wren had seen that look before. She had worn it herself in the months after Odell died, standing at the reed organ in the back room of the Lutheran Parish Hall, looking at all those stops and valves and knowing she could hear every one of them and not knowing what to do with that knowledge anymore. She understood something about Lyndon Burse then. Not everything, not yet, but enough. She pulled her coat tighter. The note held in the dark, steady and unhurried and low. Tomorrow she would take the ground pipe down. Something was inside it. She was almost certain. And she had learned a long time ago to trust what she could hear, even when she could not yet explain it, even when the knowing arrived before the understanding. Even when the only evidence was a weight at the foot of a pipe that had been breathing alone in a dark room for 28 years. Waiting for someone who would stop on a dirt road in the cold October morning and listen before they walked in. She closed her eyes. The note held. Outside, the valley settled into dark, and the October wind came down off the ridge and pressed against the old boards of the workshop, and the ground pipe breathed its long, even, patient breath, the way it had breathed through every night since 1994, since the autumn. The old man at the bench had set down his voicing knife and gone quiet, the way it had breathed through every winter storm and every spring flood and every summer afternoon when the sunlight lay gold on the plank floor and there was no one here to see it. Not dead, only resting, waiting for the voice to come back and finish what was started. It held under everything, steady as a heartbeat, steady as a promise kept. She took the ground pipe down on the 7th morning. It was not a small job. The pipe stood taller than 2 men, and the iron bracket holding it to the fieldstone wall had been bolted in place since 1968. Harwick came at first light without being asked the way he always seemed to know when a thing needed more than one pair of hands. They worked the bolts loose with an old wrench from the tool rack, slow and careful. And when the bracket finally gave, the pipe leaned into their arms like something that had been standing at attention for a very long time and was finally allowed to rest. They carried it to the padded trestles Wren had set up along the far wall, and she felt it immediately. The weight at the foot. Dense. Wrong. Not the weight of old oak alone. Something else. Harwick felt it too. He looked at her across the length of the pipe. She said nothing, just reached for the oiled leather cap at the foot. She worked it loose the way you ease a wind down. Slow. No forcing. Quarter turn at a time. The leather had been dressed and sealed with something that had hardened over the years into a grip that did not want to give. But it gave. It always gives if you are patient enough. That was the first thing Odell had ever taught her. Patience is not waiting. Patience is listening while you work. The cap came free, and behind it, fitted snug into the wooden foothole, was a turned oak plug, waxed and smooth. The kind of clean, quiet joinery an organ builder would trust with something he cared about. Not hidden, not buried, just put away carefully, the way you put a good tool in its case. Wren's hands were shaking, not from fear, from something older than fear. The feeling of standing at the edge of a thing you cannot take back. The moment before you lift the lid, before you read the letter, before you open the door and see what the room has been holding for you all this time. She worked the plug free. A quarter turn. Another. It came out clean and dry and smelled of cedar. She reached up into the dark hollow at the foot of the pipe and found it. A thick cloth-bound book, soft at the corners from years of handling. A heavy shama pouch tied with waxed cord. A canvas roll of tools tied the way her grandmother tied hers. The knot at the right side, the tails tucked under. A small pipe of polished spotted metal, hardly longer than her hand. A treble pipe with a mouth cut fine and a foot stopped with cork. And an envelope. The paper gone amber with age. In the careful slanting hand, she had been reading on the stop slips all week, one line on the front. To whoever can still hear a pipe speak. Wren sat down on the floor. Just sat down. Right there on the cold plank boards with everything arranged in front of her on the shama cloth. Harwick said nothing. He lowered himself onto the sawhorse and folded his hands and waited. Which was the right thing to do, the only right thing. She opened the book first, the voicing book. It was everything, page after page in that fine, patient hand, an entire working life recorded. Every organ Amos Vetch had ever built or rebuilt across 46 years. The church, the town, the date, the problem, the fix. The scaling of every rank he had laid the exact width of each mouth, the cut of each languid. A record so complete and careful it was less like a logbook and more like a love letter. To the work, to the pipes, to the small county churches and their aging instruments and the congregations that sang in them on Sunday mornings, and in the margins, a second story. Faith Chapel, Germansville. Rebuilt the swell. No charge. They'd had the fire that winter. The Reformed congregation at New Tripoli. New stopped rank. 50 cents. The congregation was small. The reed organ at the county home. Set to rights. No charge. The old folks like a hymn on Sunday. 1/3 of all the entries. No charge. Wren read slowly, turned each page carefully. An entire valley's music given back quietly over decades by a man who never said a word about it to anyone except this book. She looked at Harwick. "Did you know?" she said. He was quiet a moment. "I knew he didn't always come home with what a job should have paid him," he said. "I stopped asking after a while." She looked back at the book. Then she picked up the small metal pipe. Spotted metal. Polished. The mouth cut with a precision she had never seen outside of museum photographs. This was not practice work. This was not an exercise. This was the finest pipe she had ever held. And on its foot, stamped in a maker's mark she now recognized from the tools on the bench beside a small steel stamp that must have been his signature scratched fine with a sharp point. For Hattie Lore's wedding hymn, 1973. Wren turned to the last entry in the voicing book. Her finger found it near the bottom of the last filled page. The date, October 1994. And in that same careful hand pressed a little harder into the paper than the entries before it, as if the man writing it knew it mattered. Voiced the high pipe for Hattie Lore's wedding at last. 4 years late. She is patient. Said it was all right. Said Saturday. It is Saturday. Wren read it twice. Amos Vetch had finished this pipe. The most perfectly made thing in the entire workshop. Finished it the week he died. Voiced it and wrapped it and laid it in the foot of the ground pipe wrapped in cedar. And he had never carried it the 2 miles down the road to set it in the chapel organ. Never. The pipe had been waiting since 1994. 28 years. In the dark. In the cedar-smelling hollow at the foot of the one pipe still breathing. She sat with that for a long time. Harwick did not rush her. Then she untied the shama pouch. The waxed cord came loose in her fingers, and she turned the pouch over onto the cloth, and gold caught the gray morning light and slid across the shama in a slow, bright fan. Coins. Thick, dense, beautiful. 29 of them. Liberty Head eagles. $10 gold pieces. The dates stamped into them ran from 1879 to 1907. She picked one up and felt the weight of it. Real gold is heavy in a way that surprises you every time, no matter how many times you have felt it. Dense and serious and certain of itself. Wren looked at Harwick. Harwick looked at the coins. "Well," he said, "that was all." She read the letter last. The envelope opened with the care of a thing that has been sealed a long time and does not know it is finally allowed. The paper inside was folded in thirds. She spread it on her knee. "Whoever you are," it began, "you found the foot of the big pipe, which means you took it down to clean and reseat it, which means you are an organ builder and not a junk dealer. Because a junk dealer would have sold it as scrap oak. My name is Amos Vetch. I have built and mended the organs of this valley since 1962. The electronic instruments have come now. They cost less than a year's tuning and never need a voicer, and nobody learns the old work anymore. That is the way of things. I am not bitter about it, but it would be a shame to let the knowing die out entirely. I cut the wind channel up through the floor into the ground pipe so it would always have one true voice. Because a workshop with one voice still living is a workshop that is only resting, not dead. The coins are for whoever comes. Use them to live while you learn the trade, or remember it. The little high pipe belongs to Hattie Lore, who is a young woman now and was a patient bride once, and I never delivered it, and that weight is on me. If you can finish what I could not, voice the organ. Let it sing." It was signed simply, "Amos Vetch, organ builder." Wren folded the letter, set it on the cloth beside the coins and the small golden pipe and the great cloth-bound book. The workshop was very quiet, except for the ground pipe, lying on its trestles now away from the wall, still somehow breathing that low, even note, the wind finding it even here, even on its side, the way wind finds any mouth that is cut true and will not be stopped. She was 21 years old. She had a building she had bought for $1, a workshop full of tools, a voicing book that was an entire education, 29 gold coins that meant she did not have to sleep on a plank floor worrying about her next meal, and an unvoiced organ with 41 ranks standing in the dark, waiting for someone to give them each a voice. And a small, perfect pipe that belonged to a woman who had been waiting since 1972. She sat on the cold floor of the workshop for a long time. Then she stood up, set the coins back in the shama pouch, set the pouch and the letter and the treble pipe aside in a safe corner of the bench, picked up the voicing book, and went to look for Hattie Lore. The coin dealer in Bethlehem was a woman named Doreen Pask, who kept a shop on a side street off Main and handled every piece with cotton gloves and a loop and the slow patience of someone who knows that hurrying a valuation is how you get it wrong. She took her time with each of the 29 coins. Wren sat in the wooden chair across the counter and watched. She had driven down in the truck she bought from a retired sawyer up the road, a 2006 Ford with a heater that worked on the second try, and the drive down the valley had taken 40 minutes, and the whole way she had thought about the letter. Use them to live while you learn the trade. Doreen set the last coin down, looked at Wren over her glasses. "They're genuine," she said. "Every one. The dates are good. 4 of them are scarce in this condition." She paused. "I would value this collection at somewhere above $30,000. I can write the check today if you'd like." Wren kept her face still. "Yes," she said. "Thank you." She drove back up the valley with a check in her coat pocket and opened the first bank account she had ever held in her own name at a branch on Broad Street. The teller was a young woman who asked if Wren needed anything else. Wren said no. The teller smiled, and that was the whole of it. Wren sat in the truck in the parking lot for a few minutes before she started the engine. More than $30,000. For a building she had bought for $1. For a key that had been sitting in a drawer for 28 years. For stopping on a dirt road at first light because she heard a note that should not have been there. She thought about what Amos had written. "The coins are for whoever comes. Use them to live while you learn the trade." He had put that money away, coin by coin, across a working life. A man who marked a third of his jobs no charge. A man who drove a 30-year-old truck on prayer and stubbornness. Who worked by lamplight in an unheated workshop in the Pennsylvania hills. Who gave back an entire valley's music quietly without asking to be remembered for it. And still managed careful coin by careful coin across all those years to put away something for the person who had not yet arrived. She pressed her hand flat on the steering wheel. Then she started the truck and drove home to Wicket Road. The next 3 weeks were the best kind of hard. She worked from first light until the lamplight failed. Voiced her way through the stopped wood rank, first the gentlest pipes, the ones that would not fight her. Got her hands back under her. Found the rhythm of the work. Cut the wind. Let the lip find its speech. Listen for the note to come up clean. Harwick came most mornings. Opal Midden came on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Opal was 84 years old and had kept house for Amos Vetch the last 10 years of his life, and she moved through the workshop with the comfortable authority of someone who knew exactly where everything belonged. She showed Wren how Amos had liked his hide glue mixed, 2 parts to 1, warm but not hot. She showed her the drafts he kept in the back of the voicing book, the ones he used to check his scaling against when he was working from memory. She told Wren which of the voicing knives was for metal, and which was for wood, and which one Amos had used for the finest work when he needed the most control. "He sharpened that one himself," Opal said, pointing to the narrow blade at the end of the row. "Wouldn't let it out of his hands. Said the other voicers who came through never respected the edge." Wren picked it up. It was balanced perfectly. The handle worn smooth at the grip. She set it back down. Carefully. Then came the open diapason. The front rank, the face of the organ, the largest metal pipes, the voice that carries everything else. She started on a Monday morning, took the first pipe off the wind chest, fitted it to the wind tester, set the wind, brought it up. It overblow, jumped straight to the octave above. A thin, screaming tone that bounced off the stone wall and the plank ceiling, and did not sound like music at all. It sounded like an argument. She eased the wind, tried again, still overblowing. She cut the mouth, a hair, listened, still. She adjusted the languid, tried again, screaming. She spent the rest of Monday on it, and all of Tuesday. She tried every adjustment she knew, checked her angles, checked her cuts, checked the scaling against the stop slip and the voicing book, and everything was right on paper and wrong in the pipe, and she did not know why. By Tuesday night, she was cold and tired, and her hands hurt, and the pipe would not speak clean, and she sat down on the floor against the cold field stone with the pipe in her lap, and thought very seriously about whether she had made a mistake. Not about voicing the pipe, about all of it, about believing that stopping on a dirt road and listening to a note meant something, about believing that a dead man's faith in whoever came next had anything to do with her, about being 21 years old with no credential and no teacher and no one to call. Lyndon Burse's voice came back to her then, clean and precise and exactly as intended. The tools in this shop weren't built for someone still learning. Maybe she was right. Maybe Wren was a girl who tuned cheap pianos for schools, and that was all she was, and all she had ever been, and the rest of it was a story she had told herself, because she needed one. She sat in the cold for a long time. Then she got up and walked across the room to the ground pipe. It was back on its bracket now, bolted to the stone, back where it had always been. The wind found it even in the quiet of Tuesday night, pressing through the foundation passage Amos and Harwick had chiseled in the spring of 1968, finding the foot rising into the throat. The note held. Wren laid her palm flat against the dark oak, felt the shiver of moving air under the wood, and heard her grandmother. Not a memory, not an imagined voice. Something more precise than that. The specific gravity of a specific instruction that had been sitting in her hands for 12 years and had simply been waiting for the right moment to come up. You never force a voice, Wren. Cut the wind down. Let the lip find its speech. Listen for the note to come up clean. She went back to the pipe, stood in front of it for a moment, and understood. She had been giving it too much wind, not a little too much, a lot. She had been trying to make it speak by giving it more of everything. More wind, more cut, more pressure. Because it was the biggest pipe, and she had been thinking big. But a voice is not about size. A voice is about proportion. The right amount of wind for the mouth that was cut. Not more. the exact right amount. And when the amount is wrong, the pipe does not get louder. It gets desperate. It jumps the octave. It screams. Because you have given it more than it can hold, and it has nowhere to put it. She eased the toe hole down to a whisper, nicked the languid. One hair, less than a hair, brought the wind up. The pipe stopped screaming. It came up clean, round, deep, carrying the voice of a rank that could hold an entire instrument underneath it. Wren stood very still. Then she set the pipe down and sat on the floor and pressed both hands over her face and stayed like that for a while. Not crying, not quite, something else. The feeling of a thing arriving that you had given up on and then found again in a place you should have looked first. She had been trying to force the voice. And a pipe that is forced will speak harsh or not at all. She had known that since she was 9 years old. She woke the next morning and voiced 4 pipes before the light changed. It was the following Tuesday when Opal arrived with a tin of chouflée pie and something Wren had not expected. A story, unprompted, delivered while Opal sat in the chair by the workbench with her hands folded and her eyes on the organ. "Amos took one proper apprentice," Opal said. "In all his years, one." She settled in her chair. "Young man from Philadelphia. Came with letters of recommendation from the music conservatory. Very impressive letters." Wren kept working. "He lasted 3 months," Opal said. "Left in November. Said the work was too slow, too quiet. Said Amos wasted half the day just listening to pipes without touching them." Wren smiled at the pipe in her hands. Amos said after that the trouble with the trained musician is they know too much about what a note should sound like, so they stop listening to what the pipe is actually saying. Opal reached for the pie tin. He said the best ear he ever encountered in a student belonged to a woman in the next county who had learned to tune reed organs from her father and never had a formal lesson in her life. Wren looked up. Opal looked back at her over the pie tin. "Odell Calloway," Wren said. "Your grandmother," Opal said. "Yes." She cut a careful slice. "Amos said if Odell had come 20 years earlier, he would have made her a partner." She paused. "He also said something else. That the day Odell brought her granddaughter by the sound of her would be the day the shop had its rightful owner." Wren set down the voicing knife. "She never brought me here," she said. "No," Opal said. "But Amos always said she would, or someone who came from her would." She held out the pie slice on a piece of wax paper. "He was a patient man. He had the kind of faith that doesn't require proof. Just a good reason to believe." Wren took the pie, sat with it, thought about her grandmother standing at this bench in the lamplight, standing where Wren's hands had been all week, listening. She had been here, and somehow, without ever saying it, Odell had pointed her here too. had taught her every single thing she needed to find this place and understand it and be ready for it. Not by accident, not by coincidence. By 40 years of patient teaching handed down the way the old work was always handed down. One pair of hands to the next. She felt her eyes go warm. Looked back at the pipe. Let it come up. Let it go. 3 days later, Lyndon Burse came back.
Wren was at the bench when she heard the boots on the gravel. The same deliberate walk. The same made-up mind. Lyndon stepped into the doorway. She looked at the organ. At the front rank, 11 pipes now voiced, and standing the open diapason range begun. At the voicing book open on the bench. At Wren with a pipe in one hand and the fine-edged knife in the other. She said, "I hear you've been at it."
"Every day," Wren said. Lyndon came in, walked to the organ, stood in front of the voiced rank, and looked at the pipes the way someone looks at a thing they did not expect to be as good as it is. Then she turned. "I have something," she said. "I don't know if it's useful." She reached into her jacket and brought out a cassette tape in a plastic case. Old. The label handwritten in blue ink, gone faint. Germansville, 1987.
"My mother sang in that choir," Lyndon said. "This is the last recording made of the Germansville organ before it failed.
Amos Vetch rebuilt it in 79. She set the tape on the bench beside the voicing book. "I've had it since she died. I didn't know what to do with it." A pause. "I thought maybe you should have it." Wren looked at the tape, then at Lyndon. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," Lyndon said. "Just don't ruin it." She left. Wren stood at the bench for a moment. Then she found Harwick's old tape player in the back of the truck cab where he'd left it 2 weeks ago. The one he used for country radio on long drives. She fed the cassette in, hit play. The sound that came out of the little speaker was thin and worn with age. Tape hiss, the ambient noise of a church on a Sunday morning. Feet on stone floors, a low murmur of voices. Then the organ began, and the room on Wicket Road went very ill. She heard him immediately. Not the instrument, the man behind it, the choices he had made, the voicing of the reeds warm but never sharp. The scaling of the principles rounded at the top, never bright. The balance between the ranks, each one given exactly as much as it needed, and not one drop more. This was what Amos Vetch believed an organ should sound like. This was what he had been trying to build in the silent ranks behind her. This was the voice she was trying to give back. She listened to the whole recording, both sides, rewound it, and listened again. And by the third time through, she understood 3 things she had not been sure of before. How he had voiced the celeste rank to sit just behind the diapason without swamping it. How he had tuned the stopped wood to roll under the principles like a foundation. and how the treble, the very top of the range, was meant to sit above all of it, bright and clear, and carrying like something climbing.
Like a voice finally saying what it had always meant to say. She thought about the small spotted pipe wrapped in cedar at the foot of the ground pipe. The one that had a woman's name on it. The one that Amos had finished the week he died. She looked at where it was sitting on the bench, wrapped in its shama cloth, waiting.
She had made a promise, she realized, not out loud, not to anyone in particular, but the kind of promise you make when you open a letter written to you by someone who trusted you, sight unseen, who put away coins for years against the day you might arrive, who left a pipe breathing in the dark so you would hear the door was open. She picked up the voicing knife, went back to the rank.
There were 30 pipes left in the open diapason alone, and 30 more ranks after that. And a woman named Hattie Lore in a town 2 miles down the road who had been waiting since 1972 for a piece of music that was already made and already perfect and already here. Wren was going to finish it. She did not know yet how long it would take. She did not know what else would happen between now and then. She did not know all the things she still did not know which was most things, but she knew how to cut the wind down. She knew how to let the lip find its speech. She knew how to listen for the note to come up clean, and the ground pipe was breathing at her back, low and warm and steady, the way it had breathed through every cold night for 28 years, the way it would breathe through every night still to come. She set the pipe in the tester, brought the wind up, listened. January came in hard and cold, the kind of cold that finds every gap in old boards and reminds you that a building was never meant to be a home. The wood stove in the corner of the workshop burned through Harwick's seasoned ash in half the time it should have, and Wren wore her coat indoors until noon every day, and her breath made small clouds in the lamplight when she worked in the early morning hours before the stove caught properly. She did not mind. She was warm enough when she was working, and she was always working. The open diapason was done by the second week of January. 30 pipes, every one voiced to the recording in her head. Now the Germansville tape played so many times she could hear Amos's choices without putting the cassette in. She knew what he was reaching for. She understood the language he had been building toward in this room for 30 years. And she was learning to speak it. The stopped wood rank came next. 16 pipes, warm and round and rolling the way Amos had described it in the voicing book. Fills the room like a hand laid on your shoulder. She understood that description completely by the time the last pipe was set, because that was exactly what it did. You voiced the last pipe in the rank, and you stepped back, and you played 3 notes together, and the sound that came into the room felt like being held. She had not expected that.
She sat down on the floor for a few minutes after. Just sat. 12 ranks voiced, 29 still waiting.
The work had its own rhythm now. Morning voice 2 pipes before the light changed.
afternoon tune what she had voiced the day before, letting the room temperature settle first the way Amos's notes instructed. Evening read the voicing book. Not for instruction anymore, not exactly. More like conversation. More like sitting with someone who understood the work and had thought hard about it for a long time and had written those thoughts down so they would not be lost. She wrote in the back pages now, her own hand under his, the same careful scaling, entry by entry, what she had done, what she had heard, what she had learned, and beside a growing number of entries in the same plain words she had read 100 times in his margins. No charge. She did not plan that. It arrived on its own the way the right decisions usually do, not as a choice, but as a recognition. Of course, this is what the work is for. This is what the shop has always been for. Not for her, for the valley, for the small congregations with the broken instruments and no one left who knew how to fix them. She was just the one who showed up. Harwick brought firewood twice a week and stayed for coffee. Opal came Tuesdays and Thursdays and sat in the chair by the bench and told her things about Amos that were not in the voicing book. How he had tuned entirely by ear, never by electronic meter. How he believed a pipe voiced in a cold room needed to be revisited in the summer heat, because wood moves and the voice moves with it. How he had once driven 4 hours each way to return a single stopped pipe he had voiced wrong, even though the congregation had not noticed, because he had noticed, and that was enough. He said the instrument knows, Opal told her one Thursday in February. Even if the congregation doesn't, the instrument knows whether it has been given a true voice or a convenient one. And a convenient voice is a lie the pipe has to tell every time it speaks. Wren wrote that down, not in the voicing book, on a piece of paper she tacked to the wall above the bench where she could read it while she worked. A convenient voice is a lie the pipe has to tell every time it speaks. She thought about that a lot, in the context of the work, and in the context of everything else. The road through February was not all steady progress. There were bad days. Days when a rank that should have been straightforward refused to cooperate. Days when she made a cut wrong and had to set the pipe aside and start over with a new mouth, because you cannot uncutting something, you can only begin again. Days when she looked at the 29 remaining ranks and felt the distance between where she was and where she needed to be, and the distance was enormous. There was one afternoon in the middle of the month when she sat on the floor against the cold stone with her knees up and her hands in her lap and thought about the letter again. Amos's letter. The part she had been thinking about since the first day. If you can finish what I could not. Voice the organ. Let it sing, if, not when, if. He had known it might not happen, had known that whoever came might hear the pipe and understand the work and still not be able to finish it. The knowing was not enough. The intention was not enough.
It had to be done. Pipe by pipe, rank by rank. Every single voice given its own true note in a room where everything else was still and listening. And she was one girl, 21 years old, working alone in a Pennsylvania winter. She sat on the floor for a while, then she got up.
Because the floor was cold, and the work was there, and a pipe that was waiting to be voiced was not going to voice itself. She got up. That was all. Just got up and went back to the bench. Sometimes that is the whole of courage. March arrived, and with it a thing Wren had not planned for. Word had gotten around, not far, not in any organized way, just the way things travel in a small county when something unusual is happening and people have enough time and enough interest to talk about it. The woman at the post office knew. The hardware store on the main road knew. 3 of the 4 churches in the immediate area knew, because Harwick had mentioned it to someone who had mentioned it to someone else, and because small congregations with aging instruments tend to pay attention when they hear that someone in the area knows the old work. The first call came on a Thursday morning in March. A man named Ellery from a Methodist congregation 12 miles east. Their pipe organ had been silent for 11 years. The company that had installed the replacement electronic instrument had gone out of business 6 months later. Now the electronic instrument was also failing, and the congregation was small and old and could not afford another replacement. And would she come and look at it? She said yes. She drove out on a Saturday with the voicing book and a selection of tools and spent 4 hours with an instrument that was in worse shape than she had expected and better shape than she had feared. 2 ranks had collapsed. The bellows needed re-leathering. The wind chest had a slow leak at the base end that had been pulling the low pipes flat for years, which meant the congregation had been singing slightly flat for a decade without knowing it. The old women in the front pew who had been singing there since 1962 would know something had been wrong. They would not have been able to name it, but they would have felt it. She wrote the assessment in the voicing book when she got home. The date, the congregation, the condition, what needed doing, what she could fix, what would take more time. And at the bottom, no charge for the assessment. She was back the following Saturday with the tools. It took 3 visits, 3 Saturdays in March. And when she played the first rank clean on the 3rd visit, the sound filled the small stone church, and 3 of the women in the front pew sat very still, and one of them reached over and took the hand of the woman beside her. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then the woman whose hand had been taken said very quietly, "That's the right note. That's been the wrong note for years, and now it's the right one." Wren drove home on Wicket Road in the dark, sat in the truck in front of the workshop for a minute, went inside, went back to work. 2 more calls came in April. She handled them on weekends, driving the county roads with the tools in the truck bed and the voicing book on the passenger seat. A small Lutheran congregation with a failing flu rank. A Baptist church with a wind chest that needed regulating. Both of them within 20 miles. Both of them old instruments that had been limping along on partial voices for years. Both of them written into the voicing book. Both of them no charge. She was not a business, not yet. She was just a girl with a truck and a set of inherited tools and a conviction which she could not have explained to anyone, but which she felt in her hands and her ears and somewhere in the middle of her chest, that the work was worth doing whether or not anyone was keeping score. Amos had known that. Odell had known that. Now she knew it. It was an afternoon in late April when she found the note in the voicing book. She had been working through the last 8 ranks, down to the final pages of Amos's entries, the ones that had been filled in slowly in the last years of his life. The handwriting a little different from the early pages, still precise, but with a different quality of patience to it. The patience of a man who knew he was running out of time and was making every word count. She was checking the scaling notes for the Voix Celeste, the last rank, the one Amos had marked to be tuned last when the room is warm. And she turned to what she thought was the last page of his entries. There was one more. After the final dated entry. After the record of Hattie Lore's pipe. On the very last page in the margin, in a slightly different ink. Darker. As if written on a different day with a different pen. As if he had come back to the book after he thought he was finished and had one more thing to say. She read it slowly. If you are reading this, you finished what I could not. The organ is not the work. The organ is the proof that the work was worth doing. The real work is every small church in this valley that still has a broken voice and nobody left to fix it. I ran out of time. You have not. And below that, a list. 7 names, 7 churches, 7 addresses in a careful column, 2 counties worth of small congregations with failing instruments and no one coming. Oh, she read the little white. She recognized 2 of the names. One of them she had already visited. The Methodist Church 12 miles east. The one she had called about in March. She was already doing it, without knowing, without the list, just following the work the way the work wanted to go. She sat at the bench for a long time with the book open in front of her. Outside, the April light was going gold over the ridge. The workshop was warm for the first time since October. The kind of warmth that comes in late spring through old windows thick and slow and full of dust. The open Voix Celeste pipes stood in their rack, the last rank waiting, and behind them all the ranks she had voiced through the long winter. 33 of them now. 33 voices where there had been silence. She thought about Amos Vetch, who had spent 46 years in this valley giving back what had been broken or lost. Who had done it without announcement, without recognition. Who had written it all down
not so anyone would praise him, but so someone would understand what the work had been for. She thought about Odell, who had stood at this bench in the lamplight decades ago and listened to a pipe speak and said nothing, which had been exactly the right thing.
She thought about herself on a dirt road in October with $1 and no plan, stopping because she heard something, walking toward it instead of away. She closed the voicing book, picked up the Voix Celeste pipe nearest to her, the smallest one in the rank, set it in the wind tester, brought the wind up, listened. The first note of the last rank rose into the warm April air, soft and slow and slightly trembling, the way the celeste always sounds, that particular wavering quality that makes it sound like singing and grief at the same time. Like a voice that is almost sure of what it wants to say. It was the most beautiful thing she had heard in this room, and she still had the whole rank to go. She began.
May arrived the way May does in Pennsylvania, soft and sudden, like a door opening onto a room you forgot was there. The lilacs came in along the stone fence at the edge of the workshop yard, and the covered bridge over the creek turned from gray to green in the light, and the valley below filled in with color from the bottom up the way valleys do. The low fields first, then the hillsides, then finally the ridgeline going green against the sky. Wren voiced the last pipe of the Voix Celeste on a Thursday morning in the middle of May. She set it in its rack, stepped back, played the full rank from bottom to top, with one finger traveling up through all the pipes, and the celeste rose into the warm room like a question that already knew its answer. 33 ranks. Then she stopped. Because there was still the treble pipe, the small spotted metal pipe that was not her work. That had never been her work. That had been finished by the one pair of hands before hers in this room on a Saturday in October 1994, and had been waiting in cedar and shama cloth for 28 years for the person who would come and put it where it belonged. She picked it up from the shelf where it had been sitting since February, felt the weight of it, the perfectly cut mouth, the fine stopped foot, the maker's mark on the footplate, and beside it, the scratched inscription in a sharp, fine hand. For Hattie Lore's wedding hymn, 1973. She looked at the organ, at the top of the treble range, the empty socket where the highest pipe of the highest rank sat. She looked at the pipe in her hand. She picked up the phone and called Harwick. Hattie Lore lived in a white frame house on the county road 2 miles past the covered bridge. The garden was already coming in when Wren pulled up on a Thursday afternoon. Tulips along the front walk, a kitchen window propped open, the sound of a radio playing something old and slow inside. Harwick had called ahead. He was already there, sitting on the porch steps with his cap in his hands when Wren came up the walk. The woman who came to the door was 73 years old, small, straight-backed, the kind of person who has spent a lifetime standing upright
and does not know any other way. Her hair was white, and her eyes were the particular clear blue of someone who has looked directly at difficult things for a long time and is still looking. She looked at Wren. She looked at the shama cloth in Wren's hands. She knew. She opened the door wider.
They sat at the kitchen table with coffee. Hattie's hands were wrapped around her cup, and she did not speak for a moment after Wren unwrapped the cloth and set the small pipe on the table between them. It lay on the white shama in the afternoon light, spotted metal polished. The mouth cut fine, the maker's mark on the foot, and beside it that scratched inscription. Hattie looked at it for a long time. She reached out and touched the foot of the pipe with one finger, very lightly. The way you touch something you have been thinking about for so long that touching it feels like a different language. He told me 1973, she said. Her voice was even, measured, the voice of someone who has made her peace with a thing and is simply stating it. It became 1974, then 1976. Then he said he wasn't satisfied yet. Then my husband and I moved to Ohio for 12 years, and when we came back, I went to see Amos, and he said he was still working on it. She paused. I stopped asking after a while. I knew he'd finish it when it was finished. She looked at the pipe. My husband passed in 2011, she said. I thought about the pipe then. Thought maybe it would have been nice to have had it at the wedding. But then I thought about what Amos always said. Wren waited. He said the note isn't about the day it arrives, Hattie said. It's about whether it was made right. A note that's made right will be the right note whenever it comes. She wrapped both hands back around her coffee cup. I believed him. Then she looked at Wren directly. Play it for me, she said. Not today, when you're ready, when the whole instrument can hold it properly. I've waited 51 years. I can wait a little longer to hear it done right. Wren looked at her. 2 weeks, Wren said. The chapel at Germansville. I'll have the organ ready. Hattie looked at her for a moment. 2 weeks, she said. Not a question, a confirmation. She picked up her coffee. Then I suppose you'd better go finish. The last 2 weeks were the best kind of impossible. She still had the tuning. All 33 voiced ranks needed to be tuned to each other, not just to themselves, which was a different and more complicated thing. And the voix céleste needed to be tuned last in a warm room the way Amos had noted. And the Germansville organ needed 3 days of work before it could hold the full performance. And the small pipe needed to be set and voiced into the Germansville instrument, not just placed. She worked from before first light until she could not see any more. Harwick brought food and did not ask questions. Opal came and sat in the chair and talked when Wren needed talking, and was quiet when she needed quiet, which was most of the time. Cleland drove out one evening with a box of old sheet music from the Historical Society hymns Amos had been known to play, and sat on the sawhorse and watched for an hour without speaking, and then left the box on the bench and said he would see her at Germansville.
Lyndon came once,
a Tuesday evening late. Wren was bent over the Voix Celeste tuning, and she did not hear the boots on the gravel until Lyndon was already in the doorway. She straightened. They looked at each other across the room. The organ stood between them. All of it. 33 ranks voiced and standing. The case still unstained and raw. The keyboards fitted. The bellows re-leathered and full. The whole enormous instrument breathing in the lamplight. Lyndon looked at it for a long time.
Her face did something complicated. Too many things at once to name. But Wren recognized the central one. She had felt it herself in the first weeks standing in front of that row of unvoiced pipes. The recognition that something was possible that you had stopped believing was possible. "It sounds different in here," Lyndon said. "It has voices now," Wren said.
Lyndon walked slowly toward the front rank, the open diapason. She stood in front of it and looked at the pipes the way she had looked at them the first day, except that now there was something different in it. No competition, no calculation, just looking.
"I owe you something," Lyndon said. "You gave me the tape," Wren said.
"Before that," Lyndon said, "I wasn't kind." Wren thought about the exact sentence. The tools in this shop weren't built for someone still learning.
"You weren't wrong," Wren said. Lyndon looked at her. "No," she said. "But I wasn't kind." A pause. "My mother used to sing the alto line in the Germansville choir," Lyndon said. "The recording, that's her. Third voice from the left in the women's section." She looked at the ranked pipes. "She died 8 years ago. I haven't been able to listen to that tape since." Another pause. "I don't know why I could give it to you. I couldn't give it to anyone else." Wren set down the tuning tool. She thought about that, about what it costs to hand someone the thing you have been guarding, about how that is sometimes the only way to make it useful again instead of just preserved. "Come to Germansville," Wren said. 2 weeks. Lyndon looked at her. "Is that an invitation or an instruction?" she said. "Both," Wren said. Something shifted in Lyndon's face. Not a smile exactly, but something close enough. She left without another word, which was fine, which was the right amount. The Thursday before the Germansville opening, Wren drove to the chapel in the morning with the small spotted pipe wrapped in its shama cloth on the passenger seat. The Germansville chapel was a 140-year-old stone building at the end of a lane off the county road. Not large, not grand. The kind of church that has been present in a landscape so long it has begun to look like it grew there. The organ sat in the rear loft, a 2-manual instrument Amos had rebuilt in 1979, according to the voicing book's entry. She had spent 3 days on it already. The bellows were sound. The wind chest was solid. She had regulated the action and reseated 6 pipes that had crept out of alignment and voiced 2 stopped pipes in the swell that had gone harsh with age. Now she had one thing left.
She unwrapped the small pipe, set it in her palm. For Hattie Lore's wedding hymn, 1973. She looked at the top of the treble range, the empty socket, waiting. The place this pipe had been made for 30 years before Wren was born by a man who spent 4 years getting it right and then died before he could deliver it. She set it in, seated it carefully. The way you seat a pipe, you are not going to move again for a long time. Cork-faced foot, precise alignment. The kind of fit that makes no sound when it settles, because it was made for exactly this space. She closed the toe hole down to the width Amos had used for trebles of this scale. Read it from the book. Trusted it. Then she sat at the manual, brought the wind up, played one note. The treble pipe sang, high and clear and bright, not thin, not shrill, carrying the way a voice carries when it has been made right, the way a voice cuts through without forcing itself, the way certain notes do that you can still hear after the room has gone quiet. She held the key down. The note filled the stone chapel and came back from the old walls with a warmth that the stone gave it the particular warmth of a sound that has found the space it was built for. She let it go, sat in the silence. Amos Vetch had been a patient man. He had been right to be patient. The morning of the Germansville opening was overcast. The kind of soft gray May sky that makes colors more saturated, not less the green of the lane coming in bright and deep against the pale sky. Wren arrived at 8 and opened the chapel and ran through the full organ, once all two manuals checking every rank in the morning air. Everything held. Everything spoke clean. People began arriving at 10. Not a crowd. A congregation. The word had gone out the way word goes in a small county. Harwick and his wife came first. Cleland came with the box of sheet music he had never taken back, which made Wren smile. Opal came in her grandson's car and sat in the third pew and folded her hands and looked at the organ loft with the expression of someone who is about to receive something they have been owed for a long time. Lyndon came and sat in the 5th pew on the left side. She did not make eye contact with Wren when she arrived. But she came. Hattie Lore came last. She came up the lane in a gray coat with a scarf around her neck, walking at the pace of someone who has been somewhere before and knows the ground. Harwick offered his arm at the door, and she took it, and he brought her to the front pew, and she sat down and folded her hands in her lap, the same way she had sat at the kitchen table 2 weeks ago. She looked straight ahead, at the altar, at the stone walls, at the light coming in through the windows. Not at the organ. She knew it was there. She would hear it. That was enough. Wren climbed to the loft, sat at the manual, put her hands on the keys. She played the opening hymn first. A long one, a full statement of the whole instrument, all the ranks together, the foundation of the diapasons and the warmth of the stopped wood and the bright edge of the principals, and beneath all of it, the celeste wavering,
and certain at once. The stone chapel filled with sound, real sound. The sound of pipes that had been given true voices and a room that was made for them. The sound of something that had been silent for a long time finding its breath again. She heard someone in the pews make a small sound, not a word, just the involuntary sound a person makes when something lands in the chest. She played through the hymn, then she stopped. Let the room settle. Brought her hands to the keys for the wedding hymn. She had practiced it 100 times. She knew every line of it. She knew where the treble pipe would come in at the top of the second verse, the phrase that climbed above the melody and carried. She had planned it. She was ready. She began to play. And when the treble pipe sang, when it came in on the second verse exactly as it was meant to, high and clear, and carrying voiced true in a stone chapel on a gray May morning, 51 years after it was commissioned, and 28 years after it was finished, and left in the dark at the foot of a pipe, still breathing in an empty room on a forgotten road, when that one small, perfect voice rose above the rest and filled the space between the old stone walls. She heard Hattie Lore, not crying, not quite, just the sound of a breath released, long and slow, the way you breathe out when something you have been holding for a very long time is finally allowed to rest. And then quiet. The whole chapel quiet. The note still hanging in the stone air. After a while, Hattie spoke. Her voice was even and clear, the same as at the kitchen table, like a woman who has made her peace with the long way around and is simply grateful to have arrived. He was always slow, she said, because he was always careful. Nobody added to that, because there was nothing to add. Wren drove home on Wicket Road in the May afternoon light, windows down, the lilacs along the covered bridge going full and sweet in the warm air. The boards of the bridge drumming under the truck tires the way they always did. The sound she had been hearing since the first morning. The sound that meant she was almost home. She pulled onto the gravel apron and sat in the truck for a moment. Home. When had it become that? Somewhere between October and May. Somewhere between a cold floor and a stove that worked, and Harwick's firewood stacked by the door, and Opal's chair by the bench, and the sound of the ground pipe breathing in the dark. She went inside. The workshop was warm. Late afternoon sun came through the tall arched windows and lay in bright rectangles across the floor. The organ stood against the far wall. All 41 ranks voiced now and standing. All of them given their voices one by one across a winter and a spring in a room where a dead man had left the door open. She walked to the ground pipe, laid her palm flat against the dark oak, felt the shiver of moving air under the wood. The note hummed up through her hand, low and warm, in tune with itself, exactly as it had been on the first morning. exactly as it had been for 28 years before that. The one true voice, still breathing, not alone anymore. She stood there for a long time. Then she went to the bench, picked up the voicing book, turned to the last page she had written on her own hand under Amos's the careful scaling and the dates and the entries. She turned to the next blank page, picked up the pen, wrote the date, May, the year, wrote the first entry in her own name, Germansville Chapel, full restoration. 2 manuals, 41 ranks, voiced and tuned. She looked at it, thought about the 7 names on Amos's list, the ones she had not yet reached. 6 churches still waiting, 6 instruments still silent or broken or speaking in voices they had not been given properly. She wrote at the bottom of the entry, no charge. Then she looked at the list he had left her, reached into her coat pocket for the piece of paper she had copied it onto the one she had been carrying for a month. 6 names, 6 addresses. She folded it back, tucked it into the front of the voicing book between the cover and the first page where she could find it. Then she set the book down, picked up the voicing knife, the fine-edged one, Amos's, the one Opal had pointed to on a February morning and said he sharpened it himself, the one she had been careful with ever since. She looked at the organ, all those voices standing in the lamplight, every one of them given its true note, every one of them waiting now for someone to sit at the manual and let them speak together. She thought about what Amos had written. The organ is not the work. The organ is the proof the work was worth doing. Outside, the May light was going copper over the ridge, the valley filled with late color. The covered bridge glowed red through the tall window. And somewhere down the road in the chapel at Germansville, the small pipe Amos had finished on a Saturday morning 30 years ago was sitting in its place at the top of the treble rank for the first time, having said what it had always been made to say. The ground pipe breathed its low note, steady and unhurried, the way it had breathed alone in the dark for 28 years. The way it would breathe now with 40 voices around it, and a workshop finally doing what it had been built to do. Wren Calloway was 21 years old. She had $1 worth of building and a lifetime's worth of trade. She had a list of 6 churches. She had her grandmother's tuning fork on its cord, and her grandmother's way of listening, and everything else Odell had ever given her, which turned out to be everything she needed. She had a voicing book with blank pages still to fill. She picked up the first name on the list, read it, set it back down, looked at the organ one more time. All those voices, all those pipes that had been standing in the dark and the cold and the silence waiting for the word to sing. She had given them the word, and tomorrow she would get in the truck and drive to the first name on the list
And the week after that, the second. And the week after that, the third. And she would do the work the way Amos had done it, and the way Odell had done it, which was without announcement and without keeping score, and with the complete conviction that a voice given truly is a voice that will speak past you and past everyone who remembers your name. She turned the lamp down low. The ground pipe breathed. Outside, the copper light faded off Wicket Road, and the workshop glowed warm in the early dark. And the one true note held under everything, the way it always had, the way it always would. Steady as a promise kept in the dark, steady as a door held open by a man who believed someone was coming. Someone had come.